Schumann is in this sentence? Longing, hope, half major, half minor, relative major hinted, hope, sadness, longing, the essence of romantic eras music that corresponds to the expression of oneself in what one feels towards the elements of nature or feelings of love, how one psychologically faces these things, that is war and tension and hope and love and protection, and also societal unfairness and the problem, even Schumann with Clara, who sustained his household through her concertizing so courageously while even pregnant with so many of his children, while he was also writing but not so much earning, conducting but not always keeping his job like in Düsseldorf, but generally writing about art, writing about the place of music in art, compared to what he calls the new music, Neuzeitschrift, new writings about music, and how he considered the other composers of the time relatively as a reviewer, not always positively, but also admiratively, perhaps in a certain way. There is a get back and forth with Schubert, who dictated in his dreams so many things. Also in A minor, the opening of the Arpeggione Sonata, but starting on the root position whenever Schumann starts on the 6/4 in an expectation. And A minor, also the sadness of Mozart K310. Sonata written at the death of his mother in Paris, or any of the composers who left us an unforgettable imprint of the signature of their expression. After all, for the first ballad, with a hope to the relative and return to the half-diminished seven, an expectation of melodic line, Saint-Saëns Concerto, again hope, and then return to desperately minor. The minor key is a mode of expression of one's condition, one's hopes through the relative major, secondary dominance, like 5/4. In fact, all these harmonizations are the grammar of the syntax that you learn in school for your native language, in this case German for Schumann, with the verb at the end of the sentence, creating a sense of longing and expectation, probably translated in his rhythmic settlement too, or even in every word he wrote. He has this, like here, interruption in the middle of the sentence of the pulse, his piano expression, compared to the orchestra, which is more definitely. Actually, this repeated note is in anticipation to the tonic. He could have found any other note before the A of the downbeat, no, but sympathetically, by sympathy for his expression to the tonic, he's attracted magnetically. He wants to say it before the downbeat and on the tonic. I want to mean that, or the meaningful sentence. And in the difference with Schubert is that Schubert says always something after the next. It's almost like the sentences of his melodic lines, instrumental, are like his songs, which are of course built on the poetry of the German literature. You have this, and then this, and then the conclusion. Schumann, you're constantly in a underwater current that calls you for being alert, always unsettled, sometimes frenetically when it's fast, sometimes in the slower opening expression of the feelings, still unsettled on the 6th chord, not on the root position like in Schubert. The hope for the relative major in C major, which doesn't go because it goes back the subdominant. The melodic line is always mostly in step motion. The harmonizations are okay, at most relative major or hint of, possibly, and also the secondary dominance to to subdominant is not exactly incredibly complex for the purpose of complexity. It's more about the melodic line is the signature of the soulful expression of his way of being for us, almost like is a bottle in the ocean with a message inside that is in fact present when we play the old music of the dead composers while we play it. I think there is a consistency of the presence of music for us presently playing it. If not only the music of the obviously living composers, in this case Schumann obviously is dead, but so alive when we work on it, when we play it, when we express it, when we teach it, when we practice it, when we cherish it, when we spend our life trying to say, how will I mean that sentence, just like an actor saying, to be or not to be, and practicing it all his life till he says it one day on stage with the meaningfulness of his or her understanding, without to philosophize, while filter it through the psyche of their own understanding. I mean, music was for church, music was for entertainment, music was for accompanying people's cycles of life, from funeral to birth to marriage. So music was sort of the sound of life, you would say today in the film, or the soundtrack of people's life, in the expression of love, the expression of longing, the expression of thankfulness, the expression of anxiety, of excitement. All this has a psychological not protection, I would say music in a way, yes, because without words, music remains psychologically only expressive for the feelings and the moods, but it still remains the prolongation of one's soul. And I find that the melody is like this unforgettable fragrance of the flower, is the gaze of somebody you loved, perhaps died, perhaps departed, but you keep inside your soul this image of the inner smile, the sunshine that it produces to you when you think of this person. It could be also bittersweet. Half major, half minor, minor 6, major 3rd, even Beethoven in his first sonata, second theme already expresses that sense of secondary feelings that are not fulfillingly happy and not totally sad, if the mode by itself, major, minor, expresses that. Of course, composers like Ravel uses also the modal, not only the tonal, to express, like in his trio. And somebody like Rachmaninoff expresses half major, half minor, the minor 6 with the major 3rd. It's not perhaps in a way the romantic era, even into Rachmaninoff, for the expression, wants to display the subtleties and contradictions of the human nature in terms of feelings and psychology. I think so. I'm convinced of that, and that's why when you open this concerto, you already enter at the get-go. There is no introduction, there is no preparation, there is nothing. The only preparation is the bare little grace note of the left hand to hold the harmony, while the display of the harmony is stretched larger than a hand can hold, at least most of them, like the 10th. But there is no a beat of 3/8 notes, like in Beethoven's Pathétique, or 2 in the Mozart's first movement of 40th Symphony, or in the last movement. You always feel like you start with an upbeat to go to a downbeat, and here the only upbeat is the grace note that projects you to the 10th above. La do si la 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 si do mi re do do. And this mi, the above note of the D, I cannot speak solfège and English at the same time. La, si, do, mi, re, do, do, A, B, C, E, D, C, C, B. is where it longs to by the step motion of the melody. And then you hug it from above with appoggiatura, appoggiare, to lean. You lean on the D, but you go from under above it. So it's a term of endearment in music. It's all it is. If not, it would have been, which is so blunt, would have been more begging than a cacciatura from under. Escaped all the way up to the A. Of course, you can always do what I like to do for myself, and sometimes, often when I teach, actually more than sometimes, is what if he had done differently, to highlight the meaning of what it is that he chose. Not that we have the choice, since we play what he wrote. But do we play what he meant? Do we know what he meant? Do we think we do? Do we make him as a composer for us, as if personally written for us beyond the time frame, because we find that the melodic line talks to us, to our own psyche? Oh, it's written for me, it's my sufferance too. I also love, I also hope, I also am desperate, I also was... all these feelings makes us play the piece because we feel like there is a sense of connection psychologically, and you can say that appropriation and a sense of truth that comes through this narrative art form, which is of course artificial. But then the character of the novel becomes real because he represents psychologically what you have part in you. And Schumann himself was very analytical of his own dualities between Florestan Eusebius, the driven and the dreamer, to say it mildly. This kind of schizophrenia of the extremes that are within inside ourselves, this kind of contradiction of tenderness and violence, the expression artistically of it gives great art, operatic art, this love and then betrayal, and then most of the operas end always in a murder, a passion murder because of love, or perhaps of jealousy, or the sense of losing one's meaning of life, which is love. And we all connect to these feelings, which in fact music started expressing relatively late. I mean, in comparison to what we think always was, music was so much more restrained within the formal aspect of things, like man dominating nature, which is the chaos of the creation, by organizing structures that are constructed to have symmetry, or architecture, or gardening, or agriculture, and into atomic fusion. All this comes, fission, sorry, comes into the idea that man can dominate the nature, but in fact doesn't dominate one's own nature. And so we have this term of endearment, this moment of the anticipation that comes before the beat, and the delay of the note that you cherish by going around to hug it. The hint of the major resolution of the harmonization, which in the orchestra's position was only the dominant tonic, subdominant, dominant, A minor all through, and here the harmonization is subtly enlightened from inside out in major, with a hope for the what relative major brings in minor, but the chromatic drop brings us back to our condition of suffer and hope, and the diminished fourth, another way to avoid going by the whole step or half step in this case. You know, the truth is that all these details are probably funnily overspelled in my explanation, or overstated rather in my explanation. I try to spell them as well. Probably Schumann would laugh at me, thinking, what does he see so much in every note I wrote in this opening theme? Why does he read too much into it? Why are we overly analyzing the intent and the expression and the way the things are organized? And how do we all swallow it in ourselves and transform it through our own psyche and play it silently for the audience without to express all these innuendos? People say in a car accident you see all your life go through a second in front of your eyes. Perhaps a lot of this different timings of expression, all these details appear very almost unnoticeably in your psyche when you play this opening. Of course, you first learn the notes, but once you do, you start hearing how they're organized. What is the magic of this melodic line of mostly step motion and the harmonization with the root or first inversion, or the root or not second inversion, the opening, so you're already starting on an expectation. And you should not diminish the melodic line in order to go all the way to the high note, which is the tonic, but on the realization of harmonization of 5 or 4. And you finish on the middle of the bar, and not a conclusive. And the orchestra. No. He interrupts that beautiful statement into this wave. With the appoggiatura of the F expressively, painfully over the dominant E, but on the downbeat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. It doesn't mean much because you don't count loud voice when you perform it, and the audience doesn't watch the bar lines that are overlapped by the fact that it starts on the 4th beat. So the 1, 2, 3, 4 is 4, 1, 2, 3. Fine, and so what, you would say? It doesn't matter. After all, I hear it just as floating beats, perhaps barless, and probably just the expression of the waves of the expression. What is interesting, though, when you study it, is to observe that, because his expression, romantic era-wise, is boundless, but the bar lines are strictly there in the most possible square way, putting the 4 beats aligned by a bar line, as if slicing equally the thought into this organized groups of bars that fit so well Haydn. We don't even need to see the bar line to feel it in the musical proportions of the slices of the pie that are already pre-cut for you, and you understand how they flow into the melodic group of bars, 4, 8, 12, 16. Here, the idea of Schumann is, when you listen to it, is that you feel like there is a continuous flow where you're barless, you're just swept by your dreams and you don't want to count even. But if you observe the bar, the reason for which I think is so meaningful that the downbeat is the appoggiatura, and not, if the downbeat was the dominant note, then you would have a feel of settling on that dominant. Mi fa mi, and not mi fa mi. In a way, the Western music in Europe, for at least before Bach into Schumann, builds most of its expression with the upbeat towards the downbeat. And that's how most of the music functions. You know, the downbeat is the E, it's not the G. But here the downbeat is the F. It's so much that I even play 2 notes. One is enough. That's the winds and the strings. Mi, you how I think, I feel, I understand, I perhaps misunderstand, and who knows if I understand correctly, but I share with you what it feels for me when I have these bursts of octaves. It's a sense of heroism, it's a sense of breaking with that flow of expectation in which we're enclosed after the opening statement, which is almost a closing statement while it opens the concerto. And then the motion of life starts, a narrative story, as if saying from the beginning, this is what happened to the hero who ended this way. Flashback style for films in the expression. And then all of a sudden, flowing into the relative major, he reaches the point modulating the dominant. You establish yourself in G major as if that's it. And then the orchestra starts in C major. The piano timidly interacts with the orchestra by acquiescing by half-eighth notes, ta-dum, 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 but not all the notes. And all of a sudden the piano takes it to break all the vases. Sorry for this, I'm not gonna do. Boom! The pianist decides we're going to go in F major. I have enough of this longing, of this lingering, of this waving, of this drifting, of this all that. All of a sudden, the heroic soloist portion of the concerto with the orchestra is sort of the Greek choir in antique plays, commenting the action. Here, the orchestra is supportive, like a sound carpet, Klangteppich, as the Germans say, and the piano plays arpeggios together. That's exactly what, in a way, Rachmaninoff does in the second concerto. More elaborate arpeggio patterns than in Schumann, but still in the orchestra the strings plays the theme but doesn't overlap. It's so much louder than that, so it's this brooding feel that then all of a sudden the pianist interrupts that and the orchestra then exults. F major is amazing F major. Not only is it bright like sunlight that you look in the eyes, but also because all of a sudden you don't have these half major, half minors, half expectation, delays and longings which are so characteristic to the opening mood. You have something that is just there, bright in front of you, and the basses are not deep. In the orchestration, he never has tonic, dominant and double basses and celli to give that sense of expression from the top register to the bottom that the orchestra has as exponential expansion of the expression that goes in all directions. No, he has very much the violins playing double stops and double bows in the high register, F major, so éclatant, as we say in French, shining, I would say in English, yeah. And then the orchestra plays for the lower strings very high, so you feel like the whole orchestra is in elevation, is spring out. And again the kingdom and queendom of secondary dominance, 5 or 4. Once these two bursts of the octaves in the piano, followed by this bright rising of the orchestra. So this bridge was to bring the theme in the relative major. After going through that Bach uses very often in harmonic production of moving by steps to drop down to C major. But that's not only that. The purpose of this bridge is not just to go from one point to the other, from the secondary dominant that the orchestra interrupted of the subdominant, when you start on it. It's the way you do. How you decorate this bridge, how you make this bridge become meaningful thematically, when in fact it's only a bridge. But what a bridge. How you have to drop by step. And each harmonic progression dropping from minor chord to minor chord to major chord to diminished chord. Triads basically in first inversion, also in expectation, not in root position. All these details combine for the feel with the phrasing. In this lament of the 2x2 of the Romantic era, imitating in a way the Baroque. Although these 2x2 in Romantic era are not tension release and therefore louder, softer, but the release is the next intention that creates the tension for the next expression of the appoggiatura. So it creates a chain. It doesn't have to do little sub-phrasing, ta-ham, 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 ta-ha, ta-ha, ti-ha-ta. Which is why, since the beginning of the theme, it has this repeated note in the opening. I think this chain of repeated notes within the key, ta-ha, 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 without a consonant on the second note, ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. It's a percussive instrument on the piano. No, we're in denial as pianists. It's not percussive. It's singing. We sing with the resonance of the hitting of the hammer on the string, and that resonance can create a sense of vibration, which vibration is corresponding to our expectation of the sound decay before it decays. No, it won't die. I will prolong it by replaying it inside the key, ta-ha, ta-ha, so it doesn't die at the resolution, but it prolongs its life when resolved. I believe very much in this ultra legato, if I can call it, or legatissimo, in song with lyrics, words that will change, your syllables will change while you repeat a note. I want to tell you how much I love you. You don't hear the repeated notes because you hear what I'm saying, the meaning of the words, not just the sound of the words. I mean, the phonemes as sounds by themselves are music, but when you inject them with the meaning in the language you can understand. Of course, if I sung it in a language you don't speak, you would only hear the sounds, and if you hear in a language you understand, then you think the meaning. And then often when the singers sing on the same note, I want to tell you how much this, and on the piano, because percussive we hear the repeated note, overly so. But we want to induce it not to not repeat, but to repeat in the resonance. So we prolong it, we repeat it halfway up, and we play deep inside so that we have a sense of not. It's easy to repeat them all, put the pedal for the legato. It's artificial legato. It's not the true resonance that you control by how high the key rises before to repeat it. The meaningful beauty of a repeated note melodically legato on the piano. Of course you have to worry about the notes repeating because the action of the pianos are different. Every piano is different. You play constantly on a different piano in your life as a pianist, at least most of us. So you have to always be having a touch and a control and a technique that allows you to make sure it always plays. But that should be only the root of the cause, not the achievement. Oh, I've played all my notes. Oh, I passed all my passages. Many students, of course, are satisfied with this because it's the first aim. But once you've reached that capacity to control that, then you have to say something. You know, I can say vowels and consonants, and I have syllables, and I express myself in a given language, and then I tell a thought, and then I correspond to a meaning, to that thought correspond to a provocative thought, or to a tender emotional thought, or I want to be convincing with my thought, or I want to be gaining the affections of somebody with that thought. All of a sudden, the vehicle of your humanity is your expression through the words. You could borrow it from some great writers, or you can write your own love poem for the person of your choice, but nevertheless, regardless if it's ridiculous or sublime, you express yourself through an art form that is the bridge. Again, this bridge is decorated by your emotions. It's not just a bridge. It's a bridge that goes from you to the other person, or from you to the other people, or from you to the other co-workers, or from you to your own consciousness even. You talk to yourself. You have to speak with cultivated meanings. Sometimes people speak very, of course, well, everybody speaks very brash, because of the expression that corresponds to it. Perhaps sometimes there is necessity, but not in that time period, where I think that the art was the form to express the human feelings beyond and breaking with the rules of what they received. In that term, the classical terms. And I don't believe in the pedal legato, I believe in the finger legato. Also, I believe in the opening sentence legato. Is it really legato, or is it just aligned fingers with pedal? And then, the pedal is a great colorizer. It lifts all the dampers, so you get these resonances, and all of a sudden, like in Debussy, you would have Debussy, the daydreamer, creates through the resonances his musical universe. Here it's the factual playing of the note that creates the sentence. I want to tell you how much I love to tell you this place is so beautiful, and all these silly words. Any words are silly since the music is beyond the words. But doesn't matter, you can think of them to motivate yourself for the repeated note. You can think about the step motion being legato by slightly overlapping with the finger and not only with the pedal. I'll never forget how important it was in our lessons because of the generation my teachers were from the 19th century into the 20th, where their own teachers probably taught them also, so they reproduced the fact that you teach a pianist how to learn legato by practicing in the lesson the performance of the piece without pedal at all. And then it was sort of like the kingdom of finger substitutions. Everything was 5, 4, 5, 4, 3, 4, 5 into 3, 5, 4, 3 into 5, 4. Because you were not allowed to use the pedal, period. In order to be creative with perhaps sliding thumb, if it allows between the white keys, or substitutions when you run out of finger, if you have to hold chords. It obliged you to use all your resources to connect the legato with the singing effect. Of course, it's probably a make-believe, but nevertheless, the piano can sing the first concerto by Chopin. Or even Beethoven in the high notes. I mean, the high notes are short in length in projection on the piano. Everybody knows that. But how come they express a lot of emotion in the highest notes, and you have to connect them with warmth? It's a violin with vibrato, which you know you don't, because you cannot. exaggeratedly crescendo on the note with a vibrato and give a sense of emotion. So you have to dosage the amount of note before the decay to pick on the next drop. And so you have do, and then you pick up the crescendo and the fast notes up to have more drops slowly. And then the big leap of the octave and the drop through the diminished fourth. Almost dead. The fact is that you have to constantly plan how to defer the decay. And therefore, by deferring the decay of the sound, you play with your hearing and your emotion and your tip of the fingers. You're focused on that length of sound that you don't want to drop before it drops, and you don't want to create an artificial accent if you start too soft, because that makes a wrong accent. Not that it's wrong and right and it's a false note. It's not even a wrong note. It's more like the agogic of the sentence, the syntax of the storytelling. I want to tell you, or I want to tell you. You cannot say I want to tell you. Of course, you can do it in rap. But in the singing of the Romantic era, they adjusted the accents of the words of the poetry or of the lyrics they wrote for songs or operas to correspond to the downbeat expression if it's an accent, and upbeat, weaker expression if it's the end of the word. Of course, it differed from a language to another. That's why Schumann couldn't be French, because of the syntax of German that is part of his musical being. He cannot be other than Rachmaninoff being Russian, with a downbeat, very much without a beat, because most of the, not because, but partly because the accent of the Russian language is on the first syllable. Боже мой, my God. Not my God, my God. And so it becomes this, which seems heavy to us in agogic compared to I want to tell you how much that. And so obviously I express myself here in English as well as I can, though my limited vocabulary impeaches me a lot. En français, je peux m'exprimer plus clairement. The thoughts flow faster, but also the words flow faster in French. And I can express myself perhaps more fluently in French for seminuendos. But then again, most people don't speak French, so I would like to reach more people, therefore I try to speak in English, so I filter my thoughts through a language which is not my native language, nor French either, actually. But regardless, the language of trade, the harmonic language of trade is here still tonic dominant, is the tonal system, and Schumann didn't change it. He perhaps altered it by displacing the beats. The tensions become the releases. And when you do, in this bridge that is so expressive are dropping, and then you have ascending fifths, sixths, or octave, and these quick leaps always drop slowly. C major, clarity. And in fact, it was the dominant of F. But we thought for an instant that it was the tonic of C major, the relative major. And then finally C major. That's the clarinet. I'm sorry, I'm singing so bad. That's What second theme? Woohoo! Is it? It's not. It's the first theme. It's all recycling the first theme. In fact, everything is the first theme. It's a consistent variation on this expression of the opening. But of course it changes so much with the flowing arpeggios. I think when we get to that point, we forget almost all what we exchanged with the orchestra, because all of a sudden we have the flow. We are riding high. We are on high seas, or we are somewhere where there's nothing to stop us but the horizon line. The clarinet playing the melody, it sounds a beautiful piece, more like the harp etude by Chopin. What can I tell you? And when the accompaniment itself becomes partly melodic, it's not even a melody, it's just a hint of waves that become thematical. But nevertheless, the tips of the waves are the notes, and then the accompaniment is the chordal display of the arpeggio dropping and harmonizing retroactively the harmony of the melody. You have the A, then the B, and the B chord, the G and the B chord, the B and the E chord. Most other composers would have done first the chord. Don't you wish he didn't? Thank God he didn't. So this way of longing, expecting, being ahead of the harmonization is like trying to hide your emotions by escaping ahead. Each of the chromatic thirds harmonized at the end of the group of arpeggio, fully here. At that time we start the next one. It's almost like it's dephased instead of doing. Now the statement is clear: harmonization, melody, harmonic progression, everything is square on the beat. Oh no! It wouldn't be Schumann if it was unsettled. You always hear the melody slightly alone for a fraction of a moment, an eighth note of this flowing sextuplets in arpeggio style, harp-like. Therefore, the harmonization comes as a underlighting after. And it's a good idea because the high note for the melody is in the pinky, normally the weakest finger of the pianist unless they practice. Hours and hours to strengthen without to get the tendinitis because of a shear tendon 5-4, because of the grab of the fingers 1 and 2 to grab things since beginning of humanity, and not 4-5, which is not natural, like trilling with 4-5 is not natural. To think if it was the melody on the thumb, would be naturally flowing, and also harmonically the melodic line would be more brought out. But not, it's in the weak fingers. There's a sense of beauty in that this is the vulnerability of the strength, or the strength of the vulnerability of the weakest finger on the top, but is a hope to rise. It's always about elevation above one's condition, and the harmonization follows. Perhaps he didn't think of all that. Perhaps thankfully he didn't, in his innuendos when he was writing it. Let me think about what will I do. I think he was just thankful for us, inspired, as if dictated by somebody else. Perhaps Schubert in his dreams, as he used to himself say. Or perhaps just every composer composes out of his inner or her inner dreams. Sort of like a reminiscence that comes back to reality. As if you remember something you had forgotten at birth, and that you retake and rebring with your experience of life to others. I find that a good idea of what composing truly is, when it's not just an artificial organization of playing, organizing styles, systems, genres, and okay, you can do that also from this point of view, but it remains a little bit less intuitive, to say the least, than this kind of flow of things, literally flow of things. But above we have the clarinet, fa again, sorry for my singing. Well done, Schumann. Thank you, Schumann. Cut off my voice. All teachers sing. It's silly. I shouldn't have, as I promised myself, but I do. All the beautiful theme that comes from the first theme into a second theme style. It was in the clarinet, which is the lyrical soprano style, for the expression of there's a white tone of the clarinet, is also the expression of soulful hope for humanity, or the love for somebody. It's all very, very close to the human voice. And he chose it so. But when he has a secondary theme that contrasts, like in an opera you would have the mezzo, that is sort of secondary character that is there to perhaps make humor, also be a little bit of entertaining when the soulful expression of the soprano speaks of her feelings. This playful little moment he introduces in the flow of the events, the oboe. No, the oboe doesn't sound like this, obviously, thankfully. Sorry, oboists. I meant to say it has an hour, a beautiful sound that is more about character, here used by Schumann for something more playful, or perhaps a little less expressive of just this large emotion. And then the piano plays it in echo to the oboe. And who's to say the piano has to imitate the oboe and play? Perhaps it is sort of a vain moment of happiness that is just a little joy that is so on the surface compared to the real depth of the jubilation of the soul. I personally find when I perform it with orchestra that it's more effective intuitively rather than having thought about it before, but by hearing the colorization of the orchestra choices of the instruments, in the clarinet singing and the oboe playing something more mocking-like, that when the piano takes the oboe little motif as an imitation, that the piano plays it not playful and staccato, but plays it regretful, like, yeah, you don't make me laugh, you clown. You meant to distract me from my hope, sorrow, and all these expressions of great feelings that are generated through this concerto. And so when the oboe plays, I play. the oboe. Ré, mi, sa, sol, mi, ré. Of course, I could choose to imitate the oboe. Ré, mi, fa, la, 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 fa, mi. Ré, mi, sa, sol, mi, ré. And it doesn't indicate it in the score. It doesn't say imitate or contradict or echo differently the sadness with the happiness. Is the piano there to comment the oboe or to interact and interplay with the oboe and play that moment of dance in the middle of the floor? It's a very passing time moment. It's not. It's again a bridge style section. It's not thematic and material like where we have the expression of the statement. It's just a passing thing. And then everything stops, and the piano starts alone, rebuilding that sense of hope that starts from the small melodic line alone with the harmony arpeggio following. How can you not express yourself here? This is it. No makeup, no pretend, no attitude, no I am not young, no I am not old, no I don't love you, no love me not, no playing of expressions, playfulness in this theatrical aspect of things, just the bare truth. Shell, sorry for the shell, the tutti of the orchestra that exulted in C major at the end of the heroic and artificially so build up exit of the piano part from those lingering hopes and singing and playfulness and flow and delay, and most of the time complained about how much their feelings make them vulnerable. Fine, all of a sudden he finishes the exposition, forgive me, of the piano part, bringing the tutti in a rally. Let us all be happy in C major. Finally, the great rejoicing, le grand moment de jubilation. That happens in many pieces, like Chopin has in the Barcarolle. Oops, wrong key. Well, I'm not going to continue in this because I prefer to stay in Schumann. It's just it's annoying because it's enticing to play Schumann. You know, I was thinking I was going to play the example for Chopin. Give it. Tutti moment, and in fact even in his concerto when he goes okay, perhaps you can say it's conventional to have this tutti and this relative major moment at the end of the exposition because you went from minor to relative major. Okay, that is true. Formally it's true. For once they didn't break that rule. They didn't go atonal, they didn't go modal, they didn't go chromatic only, they didn't go any of this. Okay, fine. But nevertheless, what I really find so spectacular about Schumann is that he doesn't give in, perhaps because he couldn't play himself. the virtuosity of his pieces, I mean pianistically. He doesn't give in to virtuosity for the sake of it, which in a way it's so tempting for Scriabin, Schumann, Mettner, Chopin, all these Liszt, well, that Paganini doesn't have that into. I mean, people who think through their fingers. Schumann thought through his fingers not so much for the piano concerto. He thought more through the expression of the characters in his psyche. The Florestan, that is the driven, and the dreamy Eusebius, as he calls himself. Development is in A flat major. And guess who's gonna sing the aria? The clarinet. And the piano dialogues is a singer instrument with the clarinet. Then the flute. And the clarinet. About the life of God, creation, ways of things are, and the piano is commenting it, saying, but yes, but I would like more, but yes, but I'm sorry, I'm mortal. So much is said in the lamenting of the piano picking up the melodic line of the clarinet, and the clarinets pickups of the clarinets. This duo between clarinet and melodic line of the top of the piano is just so touching, so moving, so human, so profoundly talking to our deepest levels of psyche, of I think of even of subconscious, because the clarinet presents the sonata of singing in Italian, sonare, with this perfect line that is without a wrinkle, and when the piano plays it is full of with ornaments, with innuendos that go around and above the note, something like appoggiaturas, and the clarinet stays just like Olympian on top of it. How not to hear that in this piece? How to translate what, if you hear it in your playing? Does it mean you have to overstate it and try to over-characterize the difference between the instruments? No, I think it is about being aware and just know it. Be confident in yourself and play it with your fingers, the tip of the iceberg that you present to the audience. But the rest is in your culture. You cultivate it. You understand. You're subtle. And you don't have to display all these. I explain them in terms of teaching, because I think sometimes when you teach, you have to say the things, state the things, define the things, valorize the things, sometimes overstate the details, as I did since the beginning here today, because everything mentioned in words for an art that doesn't need them, like ballet or mime, when you explain it to teach it, you use words again, the bridge, the explanation, the meaning, the sound, the beauty, the sense of selflessness, the sense of expression. And then what is the heroism in the 19th century? The wounded hero, but also the hero that fights with themselves to prove to the other that they're worthy, therefore to themselves, the mirror of oneself. The orchestra and the tutti as it is, compared to the piano as the unit of the soloist, represents us, the soul, the unit, the individual. The orchestra represents creation, the army, the state, the organization, the world. And because the instrument becomes the piano powerful enough, it almost at some points needs to compete in this David versus Goliath expression of Romanticism, where you're the one against the many. You're an army of one and they're all. And they represent the eternity and you represent just now. I mean, you can use these analogies in a very inspirational way for the student or for yourself when you try to display the contrasting expression between the orchestra and the piano in a concerto. It's not a confrontation, it's not an agglomeration of elements, it's not just acceptance of each other, playing a chord, but also a display of contradictory feelings, sometimes of contradictory emotions, sometimes within the same piano part, that less with the orchestra part. It's not always the orchestra being the sound carpet and the pianist being the selfish soloist of narcissistic beauty. Oh, I'm so beautiful when I play. I think that is sometimes exaggerated in the mannerism and attitudes of people playing it just for on the surface. I think one should always think about the meaning of it, not just the beauty of it. But the beauty is part of the meaning. But it from inside out that is enlightened, highlighted, not just from outside. And I find that this is very important to express in detail, even if by saying it I'm aware that it's already cheesy. It's like putting syllables on a song that is not meant to have any words and lyrics, but you say it to yourself, and it could motivate you, even if it's silly for yourself inside. And that's why this section is, I think, unbelievably tender and at the same time revealing. Observe is that when he composed the Carnival, Schumann, he wrote one of the pieces called Chopin, and it's which key was it now? You see now, I'm tricked by myself because I'm trying to prove you this. And he uses the same arpeggiation and the same singing, and he's making it as a spoof on a Chopin piano writing. In fact, he does the same. Well, it serves me right not to remember it. But the point is that sometimes the banal becomes sublime. And when you make fun of it, as Schumann did in this piece called Chopin within the Carnival of Schumann, where he has all these characters of Commedia dell'arte and other caricatures, you feel like the sublime can be ridiculous. And that's why he was probably doing there in this sarcastic way when he named even the piece Chopin. That's finally my inner brain found it. Compared to what an interesting fact, huh? That the sublime can be ridiculous or turned into ridiculous by him mocking Chopin in the arpeggiation melodic line of harp and diva imitation on the piano. It's the duality of human being, but here it's purely for the expression and not to make any fun of anybody. This whole sequence of dotted rhythm, heroic in the sense of romanticism octaves, the piano, and then opposite the orchestra, piano, like who will oversing, overrate, overexpress the other, and then it's exactly what I thought earlier. The piano is the entity of the one, that is the army of one, and the orchestra the all, and the piano is trying to hold its place alone versus the group. That sense of romanticism of the individual equal to the group in power and drive is just unbelievably expressive in sense of the expression of the heroism of the time. Of course, he finishes down, which is the sign of defeat, because ta-dam, 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 ta-da, you should finish up in victory. But he drops. The wounded hero, I believe in that. But the point is that this section is in fact what I didn't place is the beginning of this demonstration, is the very introduction of the concerto before the amazing statement that gives the signature of the movement, is the which comes as a surprise at the get-go, and people forget it because it all goes about this. Remember I told you about the flashback idea of the it is, and then now it starts from the beginning, what reached to be. And in this middle of the development, he goes into the introduction. Da-dum, 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 dotted rhythm, perhaps galloping horsemen, or da-dum, da-dum, the sense of manly heroism in the view of the 18th, 19th century point of view, rather. And here the pianist as a sole, the orchestra, da-da, da-dum, 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 and it becomes a ping pong, shorter and shorter between me, them, me, the one, and them, the all, and the expression of this kind of competition of power. It's literally like competing athletically, as if to say, I can sustain being all of you by myself. And in most concerti, this ends up with a heroic ending, as I said, going up. And here it's descending and dropping. Is to be noted noted in the article, in the manuscript, that there is a cut there, and it's the score has been edited, and you have a new section. So perhaps this heroic moment led to something more heroic, but at this point we have the arrival, after all these bursts of heroism, to a very long sequence of singing that slowly rises by step in a chromatic, not really chromatic, just a sequence. Something more step by step, something more ordained, more organized, and more catching the breath after this enormous burst. The leaps of diminished sevenths and all that. And in that, it's interesting to observe that originally Schumann wrote the piano accompaniment, the arpeggios, and the melodic line is given to the flute. And another hand added the melodic line, dubbing the flute on the piano on top of the arpeggios with the pinky again. I always imagine, but probably wrong because I might be wrong, but I like to believe it even if it's wrong, that Clara told him, Robert, this is a concerto for piano, you cannot give a whole beautiful section to the flute and you just accompany it on the piano, you have to dub it at least in unison, which is a strange thing to do today, because you feel like, what is this section psychologically meaning? I get the longing, I get the singing, I get the bursts, I get the heroism, I get the energy drive, I get all those things. But all of a sudden it's almost as if he shuts down the engines of all these emotional drives, and he stays in sort of a chorale where he dubs the flute and plays soft arpeggios and rises by steps harmonically. It sounds like a piano sonata, which what it is. If you don't have to play the melody and the accompaniment, but you play both, then you have everything, and the orchestra only dubs you. When originally, as I told you, it was the piano accompanying the melodic line of the flute. But anyway, that was the pianistic choice made. And this long section. And in the recapitulation, himself at the end to add the secondary voice between, a little imitation on top of the flow of arpeggios. So how many more things can I play with my two hands when it's a concerto for piano and orchestra, not for piano and also orchestra? But anyway, that is the probable idea of Clara, to make it more virtuosic. Therefore, take it in your hands, as to say, literally, and play all the parts. And when he goes back to the recapitulation in that manuscript photocopy that I've observed, watched and learned and studied. He writes the numbers of the bars starting here that correspond to the exposition, and he lets her complete the notes within the bars. He doesn't write the recap for the equivalent section mirroring it. That is interesting to observe too, that he, and of course she introduced a lot of little different patterns that he didn't do in the first time, either purposely, either because it was just so alike. But you could observe by copying from the bars, let's say 1 to 20, when you do the bars 40 to whatever. I don't mind. I think it's part of being creative, and I think he liked her to be creative like this too, even if it was very limited creativity to give her, if it was the case, because I make up a little bit this in an anecdotic way, perhaps it was somebody else, but to give her this creativity to fill up the notes of the recap with the numbered bars. It's more like drawing by numbers than really drawing yourself, but nevertheless he reaches the coda. But before the coda comes the moment of expression where everybody expects in a romantic era concerto, that is the cadenza. And I think the cadenza represents well everything that he wanted to express in the concerto in a nutshell, not even nutshell, in a very large shell. For instance, he starts with the orchestra bringing the tutti drive to start the cadenza, and the piano interrupting it on a German 6 in A minor. Clearly, contrapuntal and polyphonic Schumann is. As soon as he has the piano part alone, and he doesn't have to keep the pulse and the drive with the orchestra, and he's just free to improvise writing style, the introduction of the cadenza, he goes into these Bach-like imitations, voices coming out of everywhere. Improvise this cadenza because he wrote it, but it sounds improvised because the thoughts come one after the other as a consequence of an expression, not of an organization of a formal thought. And in a way, that is what you want to hear in a cadenza. It's sort of the essence of the melodic and the thematic material, not cleverly organized, not only organized like in a fugue stretto where you have all the voices going in different directions, and you feel like when all the voices in Bach's fugue end at the stretto, you feel like the virtuosity reaches its highest point because of the combination of the voices. And you feel like when you finish the C sharp minor fugue, through this closely knit voice-led organization of voices, you have that, but in that is more about the vocal virtuosity of writing motets in many voices, where the voice leadings create a sense of expression by overlapping, over rising over each other, or reaching some climaxes, etc. Here, it is clear that the cadenza is very impulsive. And it sounds even so now, written as it is, especially when you reach the point after the introduction. Again, Schumann always drops in the moment of heroism, doesn't rise. Something that is driven in high, and in the high air, no, it drops. He rebuilds from the bottom with a 3-part triads. I mean, obviously that triads in 3 parts. Sounds like horns. Po, 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 po. D minor. E minor, the major A minor. A circle of fifths. With the passing tones of the scales of the tetrachords. This is really Bach more than Schumann. Schumann showing that he can do of the piano and organ with the descending octaves in the pedals of the organ, and this. The groups of staccato French horns in inversions of triads, but in dialogue. Less, more, less. Perhaps he didn't want that, but I hear it like this in a sense, in a certain dialogue of the French horns versus the harmonic descent. As if the left hand is the order of things and the right hand is trying to place all its expression, but the left hand inevitably, ineluctably, drops. And so you feel like you reach a point where you almost choke in this right hand. It gets shorter and shorter breath by shortening and shortening the motif, which took 8, and now it takes only 3 or 4. And finally 2. What is tighter, narrower than 2 is 1. Unmeasured in the trill, which is sort of the alarming song, scream, probably call. That I am at the end, I'm burning my energy, my candle, my fire. In that point, I hear the theme, which in the opening was just presented as a very almost peaceful song, and here this alarming trill as a vibrato, as a call of probably the human psyche, vibration and hope, and in consuming itself within the inner fire. Of course, all this imaginary. Exposing the theme, he drops again, and we rise slowly, again slowly rising. secondary voice over the first and not the same. But perhaps oboe clarinet. Imaginary orchestral timbres in the piano, shadows and lights rather. Like the voices of hope, the voices of reason, the voices of overlapping, all these voices that are contradictory inside you and rising by steps slowly. Again, he drops fast, but he rises always slowly by step. He already did this. And same thing here. This kind of ineluctable steps by step rising, like here it was step dropping. I think he produces from the piano some kind of an organ, some kind of an instrument that expresses feelings, of course, of humanity, but also trying to elevate itself to a spiritual rising. So most pianists can make a crescendo. Do the opposite, rise in weakness, rise in high thinness, and arrive up there almost the highest you can rise of your expression, but vulnerable. And so I do the diminuendo. Like almost lost in your dreams, away from the reality. And the reality catches you with a drop. And there are much of the alarming trill of the expression of the burning of the soul at the end of the cadence. It's just a small fire, just holding on the dominant, waiting to finish the tonic. And to the orchestra to enter. I had the pleasure to conduct it as well as to perform it in my life, and I can say that this cadenza, after the soloist has expressed his or herself a flow of events, of emotions, of a roller coaster of expressions, of psychology, well, the conductor is waiting and the orchestra is waiting for the pianists to express themselves, perhaps in a narcissistic way, which is the essence of a romantic era concerto in parts, though Schumann escaped most of it before the cadenza, as I showed you in my explanation of how I hear it, feel it, understand it, or try to transmit it, translate it, and perform it, as well as teach it. But nevertheless, it is the burst of the bursts of the cadenza. You break everything. You're alone, loose, away from the orchestra, and you play just your soul full of expression. The expressions, not only one, of course. And then reaches this moment where you idle on the piano, wait for the orchestra to enter, and it enters with this little woodwinds, clarinets, bassoon. Very distant, progressively will crescendo, almost march-like. Let's go now to this place and let's be well and this and that. It's no more moment for singing like we did in the beginning. That theme becomes transformed into a distant military march, and the piano accompanies it. when the orchestra builds up this march that the piano picks up as an accompaniment, it's all about pulse, about drive, about galloping. It's about no more melody, harmony so much. It's all about drive. And the secondary dominance, 5 and 4, 5 and 1. And then the piano interrupts with a descending scale of diminished sevenths, but not going up. No more the heroism of the... No. Dropping. The dropping is the wounded hero, I believe in it. And the decisive, full of will, of resolve. Ta-dum, ta-da-dum. For once, not a beat. It's not. It's yadam, pa-da-dum. That's something as a conductor was even more aware of than the pianist, because in a way the pianists rush, put pedal, get excited, and don't really count in these kind of situations. And it's part of the game in a way. Of course they should practice loud voice counting independent of their playing, and do 1 and 2 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, but they don't do. They sing often, they're counting according to the expression of the music. So it will be 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you follow your impulsive understanding of music. But if you look at the score, you see the short on this on the downbeat, yadam da da da. That gives every the little separation, the part of the beat. Being on the downbeat, decisive ending. I want to tell you over or something. And it's easy to do from the triplets to make an upbeat from the downbeat and finish by doing the downbeat on the high note, da-yam, da-da-da, which is so intuitively expected, but is it da-dam, da-da? The downbeat is on the down note, and not. It might be a detail of little importance in that flow of events that happens at the coda after the cadenza with the orchestra, galloping through the coda to end victoriously, at least in the Romantic era's point of view. But I think it is very important to do this interruption, and mention it. Not mention it, mean it. It's amusing to observe in the manuscript that he does a third statement with the Neapolitan, which he crossed out. So it was second time, the third time with the Neapolitan, flat 2 in the first inversion. But that is to darken the mood. Ta-dum, ta-da-da. Chose to take it off, but you can see it in the manuscript. And after these bursts, the piano has this chromatic inching by semi-step, which by essence is chromatic, which cannot be not semi-step. Yes, but when I used to play it as a youngster, I had only the Peters edition, and I was playing what is written, which is after all what was chosen by Schumann. This kind of harmonic progression only of chromatic descending triads. With the crossed thumbs, typical for Schumann. The tenor above the alto. And this cacciatura, and then dropping arpeggio, octave. Played very fast, if with pedal becomes a mess, a soup of notes. Without, becomes like needles. It should be in between. I think the octave is meant to hold, at least in the resonance, but not the little dissonance of the cacciatura. Again, the thumb of the left hand overlapping with the expressive descent of the chromatic scale. results in thirds with the top of the right hand. And I was always admirative of this incredibly elaborate pattern that the piano concludes with because of the crossed thumbs, the dropping triplets, the chromatic thumb, and of course the ostinato. But when I looked at the manuscript photocopy later, now recently actually, in comparison to my childhood, I discovered that there were crossed out notes from this pattern, which become this pattern of triplets in the right hand. And when I undid the crosses that were crossing those notes, I came back to hear and play what was originally written by Schumann, which became, again, it's a miscellaneous fact. It's not determining for the thematic material, the expression, the mode, but it is an interesting thing to see why from this kind of pleasant, playful, I would say almost happy, in the middle of this chromatic dropping that is so desperate, he chose to cross out notes so that he can create this more organic chromatic dropping. Which sounds so amazingly dropping down by incremental semi-steps compared to the... So was it Clara who told him it's too happy to end like this, he has to be more tragic? Or did he decide that that was a son of silly? But sometimes it's nice to be silly in the drama. Look, Mozart in his dramatic... But as 18th century masks of societal disaster, of hierarchies and people having to just pretend. And that is commedia dell'arte, that's Italian opera. But in 19th century, no, I think it's more flow of expression of sorrow. It's obvious and evident that when you play like he chose to have it played, end descent of the piano conclusive for the first movement is the piano saying, I tried, I reached, I hoped, I dreamed, I leaped, I erupted, I tried to be equal to the orchestra, equal or even bigger, I tried to be more than my existence, if the orchestra is the world, and I was trying to reach, and then at the end, after the cadenza, after all these heroic leaps up, I still drop and my condition is down. Compared to... Okay, but now I must tell you that since I discovered, by uncovering rather, the crossed out notes and re-enacted it like he originally wrote it before he changed it, I cannot stop thinking about it when I play the piece, hear the piece, or teach the piece. I have to instruct the students. I have to be myself a well-instructed pianist. I could play what is written, but I still hear, even only inside. It doesn't have to be demonstrated. Perhaps I should have not tempted to demonstrate it in a recent performance. I played one octave where he displays it as he written it first and then after. Or could be the opposite. So fast in the flow of things that nobody has really the time to absorb, surprise, reject. Of course, if you have the score in front of your eyes, it's different. If you know the piece yourself, it's different. But if you don't, it sounds like just a little variation on the pattern of dropping chromatics. Who's to care the details, right? But the devil is in the details. We spend our time learning the score, understanding the score, looking at the manuscript to understand, to try to understand the why of the what of the how. that it came up to be what it is, and it became, and what it means to us. And of course, with more powerful orchestras than in his time, and more powerful pianos in his time, we can obtain more heroism, more expressions, more this, more that, length of sound, less short decay. All these things are very true. Perhaps we enhance all of the expressions a little more than he could hear them in his time. Perhaps he felt them more than he could in the instrumentarium of the time. But who's to speculate on this? He didn't think about it outside of his time. He thought of it for his time. And Clara played it for almost 40 years after he died, till her death, played his music and brought it to us in a way as an ambassador of his musical world, of his idiom, of his inner life. And I think that thanks to her we played today Schumann, and would have been not another forgotten composer among many who drop in the shadow of time because of other being more bright there. But I still think that this kind of little details spice the expression of the knowledge, and they make you feel like a linguist. You start understanding how the word permutated, lost this syllable to gain that when it translated or was moved to another country, continent. It's very passionately interesting to learn this, not because of itself. It doesn't make you wise or to try to use, and I never do, of course, because of the humility my teacher and my parents taught me to have, but many times you could posture with those things. But in fact, you should put them back in where they belong, which is just little nothings that constitute the whole. But at the same time, even if you rightfully play because you have to, the choices the composer did, therefore you don't want to re-establish what he cancelled, I still don't play it. Well, sometimes I think of playing it, but the point of the story is that I dream to be able to ask him, why didn't you keep it? He was so cute, he was so offbeat, he was so off, as if in the end of the chromatic descent of the drama that we cannot go beyond our condition, whatever. Perhaps he didn't think of all that anyway. It was just adorable. So it became addictive to me. Of course, I only knew how much I did out of nothing, right? Do, si, la, la, si, do, si, la, la, sol, do, si, do, si, la, la, si, do, si, la, la, sol, do, si, do, mi, do, si, I hate those four last chords because it sounds like it has to be there for formal purposes. I think the flow is enough, it's beautiful, it's flying up, and we don't need to have this, Chopin does it too, I mean, who doesn't do it? It's like a call for applause. It's over, ladies and gentlemen, in case you didn't notice. Oh, that is the formal aspect that catches up with him. Perhaps she added it, perhaps he added it, perhaps he couldn't get rid of it because it's part of who he is. After all, he's a man of his time. They didn't write atonal, so they wrote tonal. They didn't write aformal, they wrote formal. They wrote loosely formal, but they did write formal. So you could say that perhaps that is to be accepted. I still don't understand the end of the Barcarolle by Chopin, but that's another story. Sometimes composers don't know how to end. Who am I to say that? Me, nothing. Him, all. But nevertheless, I have the right to think it. Just out of fun. It's not about posturing, of course not. It's just that I find that so much of the concerto is so subtle in this first movement by Schumann that this sounds like, okay, well, I have to do something to finish it. And I find that it's necessary for the audiences too, perhaps even today, though we're used to hear pieces finished, or compared to that time, but nevertheless, it is something that drives me crazy, because we have this brooding of A minor, perhaps I think it should finish up. It should finish in a rising hope, in the imagination that we can prevail, we go above ourselves. It's an elevation in a spiritual sense of the word, in my view. And every time he rises heroically in the concerto, there is always a drop, as I mentioned. So for once, he ends with an arpeggio up. And everybody can do it. German 6/6/4, 5 with a dominant 7. Mademoiselle Boulanger used to say that if you don't like to play it like he wrote it, then write your own. But while you play the way he wrote it, you have to believe in the way he wrote it. Perhaps I haven't gone enough yet. Perhaps my drive overdrives me, but I like this communicative excitement that the piece gives me, that I give to the student, and then the student makes their own world out of it. Of course, they wouldn't feel it the way I do, and that's fine, and it should be, and shouldn't be a copy or a cloning of. It means so much to us. And sometimes in the transmission we get overly excited to implement it. But to a certain extent we sign our interpretation, like they signed their music with their melodic line. Thank you.